Would you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
Certainly. Join me in saluting our nation. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, now can we do roll call?
Commissioners Howard Harris, absent. Angela Hearns, absent. Andrew Mercy,
Present.
Timothy Wiley,
Present.
Vice Chair Russell Bartlett,
Present.
Chair April Bartlett.
Present.
We have a quorum.
Public business from the floor. If an individual is unable to stay through the entire meeting due to extenuating circumstances, a total of 10 minutes is provided at this time, during which input may be given regarding agenda items. Individual speakers are limited to 3 minutes each. Any person who would like to address the Architectural and Design Commission on any agendized item is requested to complete a speaker card for the recording secretary and identify the agenda item you would like to discuss. Each person will be given an opportunity to address the Architectural and Design Commission at such time the item is discussed by the Architectural and Design Commission. Speaker cards are available at the entrance of the council chambers. Individual speakers are limited to 3 minutes each. Okay, we're going to approve the minutes here. I move that we approve the minutes from the regular meeting of May 1st, 2014. We have a second?
I second it.
Okay. Do we vote? Take a vote? All in favor? Are they working? Should we just raise our hands? All in favor? Still no?
It's not reading through there. Okay. Motion passes 4-0.
Okay, so we have presentations this evening. Let's see, we're going to be highlighting the tour of the Boulevard Music Program. Okay, so that's going to be Randy Davis.
Good evening, Chair, Vice Chair, and Commissioners. Last summer, Chair Bartlett and I had the opportunity to go to the Valencia Town Center to examine their music that they have pumped throughout the mall and in the outside courtyard areas, and also speak with their head person in charge of their music in the mall to talk to him to see how did they decide what type of music to play. At that time, they were in the process of updating their system to put different zones in the area. I'm not sure if you've been to the mall, but they have like a kids zone, and then they have an outside courtyard area. They have an area where you sit by the little pond with fish. They have different types of areas throughout the mall. So they were in the process of getting that equipment, getting funding for that, to do that. I went back later on, and they had not installed it as of yet. But since that time, I did have the opportunity to go to another outlet mall. I went to visit the Desert Premium Outlet Mall near Palm Springs. During that time, I talked to several people, about 50 people, to see what brought them to the mall and how music played a role and whether or not they decided to come out there for the music or what inspires them to shop at a particular location or to eat it in a certain location. Overall, music didn't play a role in people deciding where to eat or where to shop. The only time it did play a role is if they went to a particular store where they were playing music that they didn't particularly care for, like the store Hot Topics. They play a lot of hard rock and things like that. Or if they were in a restaurant where the music was excessively loud, did they say, well, I'd like to go to a particular place because the music may be loud. But other than that, they really hadn't noticed the music. The only time music was ever really issue with the people, not in a positive way. It was Christmas music. People noticed the Christmas music because it was consistent pretty much so inside the mall, outside the mall, in the shops that they went into. Overall, no one really that I ran into said music played a part in where they shopped. the music, basically in general, just went with the whole ambiance of wherever they were. So for the outlet mall in near Palm Springs, you had the warm weather, you had the gentle breeze blowing, you had the people, and music just kind of just feeded into that. But they really didn't hone in on the music unless they happened to be in a location where it was a little bit quiet, and it was a song that they just happened to recognize and they may have liked. There is, however, information out there where people have done research on the effects of music and how it affects people. Unfortunately, that information is not readily available. You have to pay for it. People get paid quite a bit of money to do this research, so you just can't go on the internet and look it up. You can hire somebody to do it, but we didn't have funding for that, so I was unable to do that. So that's why I went out and just talked to people. So overall, the music on the boulevard that we play here, it's part of the atmosphere of the downtown, but it really doesn't draw people to our downtown area. And I did have an opportunity to speak to some people on the boulevard. Some people didn't notice the music. Either maybe it was too low that particular day, because I kind of honed in when they said, I know music being played at all. And depending on where you were along the boulevard, some areas are kind of low and you don't hear it. But overall, they would say they were coming to the downtown to go to a particular store or a particular restaurant. But music never really played a role in where they decide to shop or eat. So based on that, I think that, in my opinion, we should keep the music as it is, kind of tailor it towards certain holidays. But at this time, I don't think we need to spend extra funding or anything like that to change our music. Just make sure that it's appropriate. We don't play anything that is inappropriate, that uses harsh language or speaks of different nationalities or male and female in a derogatory way. So that's all I have to say. If you have any questions, I can answer them for you.
I'd like to add that it was very expensive, wasn't it? The program that they subscribed to, they had to have a subscription to
Yes,
this,
most
right?
programs you have, and even with us, you have to pay a subscription to be a part of whether it's Muzak or whatever they have out there. You can buy certain types of music, but overall, it comes from either Muzak or another source, but it is quite expensive. I believe the city pays about, it's like $800 something, so it's not cheap. And you can't do it on your own either. All the music is licensed, so we just can't load up somebody's iPod and plug it in and play. All the music is licensed, and you need license for all the songs that you want to play. So that would even put us way over budget if we try to do something like that as well.
Anyone else have any questions? Thank you very much for how much time you spent on that, and it was a pleasure researching with you down last summer.
Yes, it was a very nice day. Thank you.
You did a great job on the presentation, and
Thank you.
That's a lot of great information. This isn't something that we need to do a vote on or anything like that, right? Okay.
No, we'll note the comments and make sure that those that are interested are aware that you carried out this investigation.
Should we move on to Brian Luedeke? You have highlighting the tour from the Lancaster Apprenticeship Training Center.
Yes, we actually had myself, Commissioner Wiley, and Chair Bartlett went and took a look at the training center that is done by the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, I think was the main one we looked at. And then we also went and looked at one in the San Fernando Valley, and it escapes me right offhand which organization that was. But they, I think, are more pipe fitters and steam fitters and so forth. What I think we went to look is to investigate, is there some possibility of one of these sorts of centers in the valley in the future. I think it certainly provides an extremely valuable route for people who want to look at getting into the construction trades of that kind. Pretty comprehensive, very committed people from what I could tell, and a pretty wide range of technical equipment and things and times and abilities. They really seem to work well within the various time schedules that tradespeople have to work. I don't know, the two commissioners that went, I'd appreciate whatever your insights and thoughts were in looking at it, too.
Well, one, I was very impressed with it. The fact that what they had to offer and to give, I guess, I would say like a second chance in life to some people, and then those who already fit into that career field, the opportunity to expand and grow. And I was just thinking, I says, when I came back, I said, I work at the college. I says, hey, how could I get the people here? Because we do some of that here, but to me, that was even more advanced than what we have, and to give them the opportunity to get back into the workplace. If we were looking at something like that here, I thought, well, perhaps we could, if we have vacant buildings or things of that nature that should be filled up, maybe not necessarily do what they're doing because they already have that trade going, but maybe look at other industries and see if we could maybe, if there was that possibility or what the needs are, start up that kind of forces up here to, give opportunities to people to get in those other trades. And, one is the transportation down there. So if that was a quick route, I think it wouldn't be such a bad idea, just pushing it. But two, maybe we could just look at our own and growing something up here for ourselves to, give us a part of that.
I agree. I thought that was, there were some amazing opportunities. They even had some, wasn't it some scholarship-type programs where, I don't remember what the specific criteria was for that, but there was a lot of opportunities for people who were going into those fields and job placement afterward. And if there was something that we could do to do some sort of a satellite program out here for that, with that school or organization, I think that would definitely help our community.
Yes, I had a discussion with the city manager and a couple of others, and I said, obviously, the investment that they put into both of those facilities pretty significant. I said maybe the most cost-effective thing we could do at this point is work with them to figure out, as Commissioner Wiley was noting, some way to make it easier to transport. But it was amazing because you had people who were working on jobs and they would have to come in there, shower, go to their class and go along. The issue of second chance, I think, was very, very good. But I also appreciated the fact that they expected them to meet a certain level of standard and they had to be there. And they could easily be removed from the program if they didn't appear to be seriously pursuing what they needed to do. So I think there's certainly here's opportunity, but here's expectation. And I think they molded that together pretty well. And looking at buildings, the pipe fitters one is actually in the former Easton baseball bat manufacturing facility. So great reuse of a building, but kind of sad to think about. That's that's more jobs that aren't there. So, but yeah, I think maybe in looking in the long term, we should try to see whether there's ways to work with the college or even the high school level. And say, hey, maybe there's a way to start integrating people who aren't necessarily on the college track, but, are smart, like to work with their hands, like figuring these things out, and say, hey, here's a program that will help provide some transportation for you so that you can get started in this.
Yeah, I think, anything that provides those skilled trades is important for our economic growth, and we should be looking at all options that are out there. I particularly like the idea of partnering with the colleges and making sure, we want to make sure that there's avenues, there's multiple avenues depending on what people's needs, whether it's through the union trade shop or through the community college system, so that these opportunities are available to as many of our residents as possible.
Was the idea that the city fund a program or start a program or more sponsor the initiative and bring in a third party to administer, collect funds, and present?
Yeah, the programs actually, or the centers actually operate as kind of a partnership between the unions and the building trades, the people who actually use those workers, and they each contribute into that. I can't imagine the amount of capital that it's taken to build those up over time.
Do you know how
yes.
long they were operating down there?
I know the IBEW actually, in their facility now, they told us that they had moved there when, which company? There was a company that had left that facility. They were originally in downtown Los Angeles, and they were there for a long, long time before. So yes, it's not something that
We're not going to set up shop in a
started
month.
a couple of years ago.
Right.
It's been a long-term thing. So, given that, yeah, it may be more a matter of trying to figure out how do you connect people into it and make it easier for them to go down there. The valley's a little ways away from where they're located, but man, it looks like the training they get is top-notch. So.
That was an amazing facility. How many square feet was that building?
Oh, it was hundreds of thousands of
It
square
was
feet.
Enormous. Yeah.
And the amount of investment in the equipment and the power itself, that they had was incredible. Fully functioning traffic signals and other things that they learned how to work on, and
Electrical panels, the commercial panels, and it's
Right.
amazing. Yeah, that would definitely not be something that would be inexpensive to set up,
no, very, very costly.
replicate.
So maybe we look more at the way of, now that we know the resources there, how do we connect people to it that may not even be aware of that avenue? And
Do we know what the tuitions were for those apprenticeships?
I forget what the amount was that they paid. Part of it is their union dues that they do and so forth. One thing that I was thinking while I was there too, it used to be that a lot of our high schools offered these kinds of technical
I was gonna say
sorts
that.
of trades,
Right.
but a lot of them don't
Right.
anymore. So they've kind of filled in some of that gap. But it's a shame that we don't have more young people that have access to that, because I'm not even sure they're aware of those routes unless they have family friends or other people who are plumbers or air conditioning repair specialists or other kinds of people that, say, hey, you can earn a good living and do well for yourself in this.
Were these programs only open for union members?
Yes,
You had,
yeah.
Well,
over
you
time.
became.
Yeah, they're union.
in my opinion, these hands-on trades are going to be the jobs of the future, because most of the generation now is training to be in electronics, and they wanted to be in the computers. So the hands-on trades are going to be in high demand.
Yeah, we saw that even locally. With the slump in the 1990s, when they started getting back to building again, they had trouble finding, skilled, especially at the journeyman level, people who knew things like tile, electrical and those things. That's even been more pronounced, recently. And I think it's the case. A lot of people said, hey, there's no future in that, so I'm not going into that. But now the demand is really, really great.
So there's really nothing to do with the presentation. We're just,
No, Mark said the biggest thing, the city manager, he said the biggest thing was so that we became more familiar with it, that you were aware of it. There are really some other steps that would have to happen that's outside of our area of ability to manage for anything to happen beyond that. But I think it's worthwhile that we're aware of it.
is there anything for us to recommend to any department or other commission to look into further to see if there's anything we can do with this?
I can carry back the recommendation on trying to see if there's better ways to transport people. I think that's the biggest challenge right now in this area. Just from, the lack of jobs is one thing, in terms of some of the construction work, but trying to make some of our young people aware of these opportunities. And I don't know what they do in terms of returning veterans or people coming out of the military or
We did have
things
a
like
program for that, yeah.
So,
Would we have the ability to maybe partner with those unions that already have their programs running and create that satellite campus here?
yeah,
For, maybe the electrical or the framing or, maybe some of the general trades that would,
there could be. I think, once again, it really comes down to where is the demand at
Right.
this point. And, sadly, if you look at where investment's going right now, it's in Pasadena, downtown Los Angeles, Glendale, areas that maybe 25 years ago, people weren't doing that. But that tends to be where a lot of the jobs are available now. And that's where those workers are. So I think it depends to some extent on how likely things are to happen here. I mean, we did bring up with them things like the Kinkishario plant, which uses people in that regard. The aerospace companies, obviously, when they're operating, some of that requires, particularly on the electrical side and other things. But I don't know, what a city can do other than to make sure that people are aware of this, that it's supportive if those facilities want to be established, and so forth.
Is there any way to work with the EDD on finding out how many people in our local area are unemployed in these types of trades that might benefit from this program?
We can probably get that information pretty well. And the city's a participant in job fair programs. Normally, what we're trying to do there is kind of match up employers and prospective employees. But this may be another aspect of it that we could take a look at, too.
but the
you
people
know.
training down there weren't proficient in their trade. That's why they were there learning that trade, right?
No, some were
Some
already.
are.
They had advanced levels, too.
They have to get the advanced, when new designs or new information come out, they had to go through a proficiency level. What I was thinking myself here, though, is perhaps if we thought as a city, and I'm a wild thinker, but if we kind of reverse, we all go down the hill rather than having people come up the hill. Question mark and a thought is perhaps if we could get those part of the industry, not the whole industry, find one of our warehouses or something like this that's kind of sitting there with just been sitting there, and say we would like you to do this aspect of, we'll say, the railroad crossing, because they had people coming from Pomona, to the city of Commerce and all over, which we tend to think is different, but maybe we could get something that's here that feeds part of our local people, and then have some of their people coming back up here where you kind of get a taste of it, and kind of help build or spur our community, because we have something that's worthwhile to everybody else rather than just being dried out. As you mentioned earlier, the ROPs used to do that housing part. I remember I took students over there and they would build a house from the bottom up, do the framing, the plumbing, and the whole bit, and that would give them an opportunity. And just a thought, because if we don't do something with the people here, we're just going to continue to build our negative base, and I don't think that's what we're looking for, people who don't have anything to do or anywhere to go. And I was really impressed with the young men who came and, like you said, stayed and changed and did things. And I just see we're really not that far down the hill. It's just a matter it's in our thought process that we can't come up here or we got to get there. And maybe we say, hey, do you mind? And maybe it's opening. I don't know. To say, look, we'll take this part, partner with you and train you on, whatever that might be, and then kind of give us that feeder mode to get us started, or, kind of having it going both ways.
I just want to ask a question about what you're saying. Were you suggesting maybe a satellite-type program, where having a small starter
Right.
with a small amount of equipment to get started, maybe at the entry level? something like
Exactly.
that?
Because it was huge. You were there, and the little boxes, where you put the electrical in, and knowing how to do that. I mean, you have to see it to understand how, if you weren't there, it's like really magnificent. But I know we couldn't do that tomorrow, but maybe just a portion of it to say here, and you can get started. Now, I know, like, Antelope Valley College, we do some, but we don't do it to that. And then to be connected with the union already and kind of almost afford you the opportunity to have a job, that's a good for our community thing. That's what I see, because the more we let people walk around and not do anything, the less they do the wrong thing. And
having a place for them to go. I mean,
Right.
You can even look at our demographic that's going to college. There's no guaranteed job after you graduate.
It's true.
You really got to go cultivate that. So, I
But
like
like
the
you're a
idea
nurse, like
of
the nursing
unions.
program builds that, and so it builds it. I can get a job at a AV Hospital or Palmdale.
Does the college still have the A&P programs
A&P is one of them that's really big. That kind of
for the aircraft?
right. You walk out and you,
Right.
you can walk into some employment, and I see that more of that is needed also.
Okay. So, Brian, was the idea more just to get the thought and discussion going within the city that we have these, or was the idea to let's start building a program or building a relationship with a union to get a program started here?
I think the idea was to really get an understanding of what the facility was and what they were doing. One of the things that Commissioner Wiley kind of pointed out, and it might be interesting to see what they have done, if anything, in the Inland Empire, because a number of the people that were there were from places like Rancho Cucamonga or Rialto or those places, which means they're coming in not only, they're coming from east, and Inland Empire's had more development activity in some ways than we have. So I sense that to mean that whatever they have out there, if anything, it's not as good as whatever the core facility is where they're at.
Well, one of the other things that they said was that they will cater to, well, not cater to, but they will try to send the people that are in their union closest to their region for
Right.
when they send them out for jobs, too.
But I do think as we discuss finding new opportunities, we shouldn't just limit ourselves only to union. We should be looking at what the community college is doing, what also non-union shops are providing, so that we have as many different avenues, whether people want to go union or non-union, to get this training rather than picking only one.
And we have a number of career colleges in the valley already.
Yeah,
getting-
it'd be
getting
curious
the
to see what role they play. I know San Joaquin Valley College, I've seen some of their advertisements and things, and Commissioner Wiley may have a far better idea of kind of what those options are out in the valley now.
Okay. Do you need us to go do anything to further the conversation, or is it something that you take back to the city
I
manager?
will take it back to the city manager, and what I usually do is kind of condense down what the commission's comments are, questions, and see what he knows from his aspect of things, so.
Okay, so it sounds like we've wrapped up this part of it. So we're going to move on to the Safe Routes to School plan with Elma.
Thank you. Commissioners, good evening. This is just a quick update on where we are with the Safe Routes to School. Just to kind of remind you, back in May of 2013, the city had received a grant from LA County Department of Public Health to fund a comprehensive master plan for safe routes. The goal was to have a mini plan for each of the public schools within the city limits of Lancaster. However, back in April of 2014, the federal budget for the Center of Disease Controls cut that funding, and our master work, it ceased back in September. At that time, we had completed the draft plans for 19 of the 13 public schools. Staff remained committed to the completion of that plan, and we applied for funding through the Caltrans Active Transportation Program, the ATP. The ATP is a newly created program last year. It consolidated several of the state and federal programs, including the Transportation Alternatives Programs, the Bicycle Transportation Account, and the Safe Routes to School, all into one. From that ATP, the city was awarded 2 of the 4 project applications that were submitted, one being the continuation of our Safe Routes Master Plan. The other one is for physical improvements for 5th Street East from Avenue H8 to J4 to do, that affects 3 of our local schools. It's Paiute Middle School, Linda Verde, and also El Dorado Elementary. So we were pretty excited about that win. But getting back to the Safe Routes, the fund will allow us to complete the remaining 11 plans and to finalize the comprehensive plan. Recently, we have selected Ryan Snyder as our consultant to take the project forward. There is a staff report to reflect this decision to the City Council on May 10th, which is going to be next week. After that date, we'll proceed and get the necessary contract agreements, and we're looking to anticipate starting working with our schools again in mid-March. The Safe Routes Master Plan focuses on the areas within a half mile of each of the schools, and the plan also includes the 5E approach for promoting active walking and bicycling to school. As a reminder, the 5Es, number 1 is engineering. It's to make physical improvements to the routes that students use to walk or bike to school. Number 2 is education, to teach the students safe walking and bicycling habits and to teach the parents the importance of driving safely around the schools. Number 3, encouragement, to promote walking and bicycling to school so that the students choose to do so. Number 4, enforcement, to enforce the rules of the road, as well as safe pickup and drop-off practices are adhered at the schools. And number 5, evaluation, to track the plan to make sure that it is a success and to modify the plan as needed. By securing this recent ATP grant, we have the ability to continue our efforts, which we think will have a significant positive effect on the citizens of Lancaster. The development of the plan has been a great partnership with AV Partners for Health, our parents, 4 different school districts, city staff, all for an important cause, and that's to create a safe, convenient, and fun opportunities for the students to walk and bike to and from school, an opportunity for more physical activity, and to enhance our traffic safety. That concludes my report. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Complete Streets. So that's going to be with Chen? No? Yes? Or Brian?
You may remember being involved in. That adopted plan and that process really shifted some of the thinking that we are doing in our city in terms of how our transportation system operates, what are the things we ought to consider as important. And that has culminated in our desire to really look at doing a Complete Streets Master Plan. Now, we didn't just simply look at doing that. We actually went out, applied through the Southern California Association of Governments, and they have agreed to fund that. We're in the process right now of going through and selecting right now. But as a commission, you will have a role in this. So I want to kind of go through the Complete Streets concept and really what we're looking at from a city standpoint in terms of a Complete Streets plan. Parts of what we will do, you're already seeing out in the community. And we're doing things in line with our adopted master plan of trails and bikeways. And you're going to see more of that. But I really want to give you an overview of what we're trying to accomplish with our Complete Streets effort. Now, Complete Streets really looks at a number of different factors, but we can start with the idea of a street perhaps in Burbank or a street in Torrance and say, are these complete streets? You really can't answer that question from where we're standing right now because we don't know exactly what the goals of that particular, is that on? Should be. Yeah. What the goals of those streets are. We don't quite know who all the users are. We don't quite know what the various factors are that have to be considered in those street designs. So it's easiest to say that complete streets are streets that we design for everyone who's expected to use it. We know that our boulevard is a complete street. We also know that our boulevard design is not the appropriate design for every street everywhere. But we're really looking to try to make sure that all users have kind of an equal footing on those streets, that it takes into account different ages, different abilities, and we see that happening in terms of not only what the physical need of the street is, but what kind of area that it's serving. So, this idea of what's safe for all users. Now, this is not something that I would necessarily advocate, but it does exist in Fort Collins, Colorado. Yes, that is a freight train in the middle of the road. It is one of their downtown streets. That rail line has been there for many, 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 many decades. And it carries things like tank cars full of oil and other things. The trains travel at about 15 miles an hour. I was kind of fascinated in looking at this, but as you can see by the pedestrian to the side and the person on the bicycle, they seem to have adapted pretty well to what's happening there. So in this
Coincidentally,
case,
Brian,
what?
Brian, on this street, there's a bike shop, right?
Yeah.
Like the tracks,
Are you familiar with it?
yeah, we lived up there for a number of years. And
Okay.
it just doesn't make sense, but it was there before the town was, so.
Yeah.
They built it around.
Built it around, and amazingly, they've kind of adapted to it. It's kind of an interesting situation. Now, we might look at that and think that, hey, that's patently unsafe on its face, but there are things that were attempted to make things safe that probably are just as ridiculous. This happens to be a street. I was really fascinated by this one. This is in a city in Florida. They hosted a family fun walk on this, on these 6 to 8 lane wide roads, with a walkway that apparently serves very little, if anything. And somebody spent a lot of money to create this street. The unfortunate thing is that while I was researching this, there was sometime shortly after this opened an 84-year-old lady who got hit and killed walking in this area, and the driver wasn't charged because they basically decided that she had violated the car's right-of-way. So, you know, things that look like they're designed to be safe aren't necessarily safe. As we saw in the previous picture, things that we might think are not safe might be safer than it would appear at first glance. And that really kind of ties in to a major thing that we want to think about in our Complete Streets effort. We as a nation really understand the concept of roads. Roads are high speed. They're really designed to get you from one place to another quickly. We've built a lot of these over the last few decades, and they've had a remarkably beneficial effect on economy, people's choice of mobility, and so forth. We know roads can be highways, freeways, and we pretty much know how those are designed and how they operate. It used to be, as a society, that we were also good at building what you might call streets. Streets are really not designed for the same thing that roads are. Streets are really designed to provide accessibility to the local land use that's along them. You can look on the picture on the left, that happens to be Brainerd, Minnesota. We'll get back to that in a moment. The picture on the lower right, that's downtown Lancaster in the 1920s. As you can see, that was a pretty well-used street for all kinds of modes of transportation. There's people on foot, the cars don't move very fast, angle parking seemed to work pretty well for them. But these were streets, and the streets were really designed so that people could cross them easily, operate on them at a local level. What we've done instead, and we have a lot of these in our city, and they're one of the things that we struggle with most as a staff. We now have a lot of what has been termed as STRODs. They are road-street hybrids, things that try to do both a mobility and an accessibility function, and they end up not doing very well at either one. There's an engineer out of Minnesota who refers to STRODs as the futons of the transportation system. Futon, as we know, doesn't make a very comfortable couch, and it doesn't make a very comfortable bed. It doesn't do either thing very well. STRODs are the same way. They don't do either thing very well. STRODs are actually defined in the Urban Dictionary online for anyone who's familiar with that. It's a combination of street and road. It's built for high speed at the same time that it tries to provide access to local land use. We would never think about putting traffic signals, driveways, or crossing streets on a 60 to 65 mile an hour freeway. Yet we have roadways that we do exactly that on. We have high speeds. We expect them to be crossed by pedestrians. We expect bicyclists to be able to use them. And at the same time, we expect that they can be used as an accessibility tool for the adjoining land uses. You don't have to go very far to find them. This one happens to be out of Santa Clarita. It's Soledad Canyon Road for anyone who's familiar with it. They are extremely unsafe at any speed. And if you've driven along this particular street, you know. It's unsafe when you're driving. It's unsafe when you're slowing down to turn into a driveway. It's unsafe when you're trying to pull out of them. That's one of the major things that we want to take a look at in our community. Things should be a road or they should be a street, but when you start combining both aspects of them, they really create some problems. We want to approach things differently. We don't want to go through the STROD environment that we really built upon. We want to look at human behavior as the fundamental determinant of how we ought to do traffic engineering. It's fundamentally adaptable. It's not fixed. And by that I mean you can influence behavior of drivers and other users of the roadway by how you design it. So as we look at our complete streets design and our plan, we want to look at the issues of speed, which is a major issue in our community, safety, how connected the network of streets are, and the productivity of those streets. And I'll get to that one a little bit later, but that's something we've kind of forgotten about as we talk about our transportation network. We know from our work on the master plan of trails and bikeways, as well as the safe routes to school, that the higher the speeds, the riskier things are for us as human beings. If you get hit at 40 miles an hour, you're going to die. 85% chance. If you get hit at 20, you're likely going to be injured, but you're probably going to live. And that makes a big difference in how things occur. I took a look recently because I have a friend who lives in San Francisco and has a cousin that lives in the Quartz Hill area, and we talk about the differences between the two places. In the Antelope Valley in 2014, we had 63 fatalities as a result of vehicle collisions for about 425,000 people. San Francisco, with double the population, had 29 fatalities. 17 of them were pedestrians. But what that means, if you work the math through, is that statistically, if you're in the Antelope Valley, you have about a 435% greater chance of dying in a vehicle collision than you would if you lived in San Francisco. I started looking into this largely because when my son relocated to San Francisco to go to school, and we relocated the car, our insurance rates were lower in San Francisco. And the reason they're lower is because they don't charge you as much for bodily injury and medical costs. And that's a reflection of the fact that you just don't have the same level of bodily injury that you do in collisions in San Francisco. San Francisco has more collisions. You have more fender benders than you do here. But the collisions here are far more dangerous than the ones that happen there. And speed, of course, is the reason. Speed is a function of the design of the roadway. This actually is not a comic thing. This actually is from the cover of a federal highway publication. And what it was trying to do was to say, when you look at a roadway, there are a lot of speeds that are kind of embedded in the design of the roadway. The one that we want to really look at is what operating speed is. And what that's considered to be is a driver on a roadway in generally good weather, what speed are they going to travel? And that's what we want to look at. In many cases, we're finding that operational speeds are higher than posted speed limits in our community. Hans Monnerman was a Dutch traffic engineer. We lost him, unfortunately, to cancer several years ago. But he kind of was a pioneer in this concept of shared space and the idea that, ironically, kind of going back to our example of the train, that the more apparently dangerous that you make something, the safer it actually becomes. People have looked at our boulevard, for example, and told me that seems very dangerous. Well, it's ironically safer because they're having to pay more attention. Much of what we do as we drive is we do it automatically. We assume that if we drive the speed limit, follow all the rules, don't run a red light, that we're inherently safe. And what his comment is that every road tells a story. It's just that many of our roads tell the story poorly, or they tell the wrong story. So, it is true, if you need a sign to tell people to slow down, you probably designed your street wrong. If you are getting speeds higher than what you intended, there's something wrong with the design of the street. There are ways to deal with it. This is not one I would recommend, but you can see people getting really, really frustrated in places where they think people are driving far faster than they ought to. Look around Lancaster. Some of you probably are familiar with roads where the city has put in speed humps. Those have been put in at the request of residents along those streets because those streets actually permitted far greater speed than people wanted in their residential neighborhoods. You can look at this and say, which is the 25-mile-an-hour speed street here? And it's sort of a trick question because actually that's the speed limit on both of them. One of them has a sign. This happens to be an older part of Denver, Colorado. This is actually within our community. But you can get an idea. Which of these streets, as a driver, do you visually get the clue that you need to go more slowly? My guess is probably the one on the right. The one on the left kind of gives you the idea that, hey, you know what? The street's telling me I can go faster. That's a very important part of what we want to look at in this plan. There are areas that recognize this. Bend, Oregon in general is way ahead of California in kind of thinking about this issue of street design and speed. This happens to be a new residential street on the left, a more mixed-use street, commercial street on the right, but they both use different things to visually narrow the travel way. And what that does is gives people the clue that they need to be going more slowly. You can see kind of an effect of that in our own community. If you've ever come from the north on Sierra Highway, when you cross under the Avenue H Bridge, it narrows down, or it appears to. The width of the lane actually doesn't change, but you'll watch people brake because they feel more constrained as they get to it. That's one of the things that we want to look at as far as how we can effectively do things. Back to on the left, Fort Collins, Colorado, the width, the right-of-way of that street is actually 120 feet. That's the same right-of-way as we have on Avenue L in parts of our community. But you can see the way it's designed is far different and gives people a different sense of how they ought to drive and behave in that area. The one on the right is from Montrose, which is a small community on the north side of Glendale, for those of you familiar. We are looking at how do you incorporate transit into complete streets. I don't look at Las Vegas as a great example of many things, but they actually did a pretty good job on this bus rapid transit lane. They did the right thing with it. It's bus only, it's in the middle of the roadway. Someone getting off at a stop only has to cross half of a street. Actually, this developer of this commercial center did the right thing. He made this very accessible and very easy. This is actually on this side of this stop, and pedestrians can walk very easily off the bus and into the spot. On the other side, you see that there's a huge parking lot, and people have to cross a long, long way across a very hot parking lot in Las Vegas to get to where they're going. The irony of this is that this is actually the headquarters of the Transit Authority, who didn't make their own facility very accessible to transit users. Those of you familiar with what we did on Valley Central, we know that Complete Streets makes things safer. The bike lane that was put on Valley Central, if bikers are using it, that's great. That wasn't the primary reason that we did it. We did it to create a better, safer, slower environment for a street that, believe it or not, had a huge number of collisions on it as a result of driveways and people rear-ending each other and not being able to see. Since the time that we did this road diet, the speed on the street has dropped by about 5 miles per hour. We've had about half the number of collisions that we would have otherwise had. And, believe it or not, the street carries about 15% more traffic than it used to, which makes the center owner very happy. So we can achieve many of the goals that we're looking at if we just acknowledge that we can design things to be a little slower. Because one of our tragic ironies is that our wide streets do allow us to respond very quickly to accidents caused by our wide streets. This isn't just kind of off the cuff. There has been a study done, used Longmont, Colorado, and it discovered that the wider the street, the more collisions you have along it. So there is a correlation between street width and the number of collisions that occur. We talked about this in our master plan of trails and bikeways. We want to really make sure that as we develop, particularly local streets, that people have ways to get to things without having to hit these arterial networks. This hurts walking and bicycling, but it also makes it very, very difficult for drivers because it forces all the vehicle trips onto a certain small number of streets, which then have to be designed overly wide to accommodate them. Many of those trips could be alleviated if we simply made better connections at our local level. That also allows us to make for better walking environments. The more connected the street system, the farther somebody can go within a certain period of time. This is the blue shows that if you start at that intersection, you have a different matter of area that you can go in a 5-minute walk. The traditional grid streets, such as you find in our downtown, allows a lot of area to be covered in a 5-minute walk. Whereas the more disconnected the street system gets, the less that happens. San Luis Obispo, great example of a very well interconnected system. Grid, their downtown, very walkable. Very poorly connected. I hate to pick on our sister city, but I will. This is the Rancho Vista area. I find this really fascinating because this was designed with an almost overt hostility to walking. This neighborhood, this neighborhood, this neighborhood, and this neighborhood don't connect to each other in any way. The only way you can get from here to here is to actually go out onto the arterial street and come in on another one. If you happen to live here and here, there is no effective way to walk between them. So that's the kind of thing that we really want to avoid. The final thing that I want to talk about is this aspect of value and productivity of the street. The gentleman that you see pictured here, Chuck Marone, will actually be here in a month to give a presentation in this council chambers. We'll talk about that at the end. But one of the things that he's really looking at as a trained civil engineer is what do streets really function for at a community level? And one of the things that they do function as, and should, is a platform for value. They should provide value to the properties along them. This is back to the picture of Brainerd, and you can see that this street supported a great deal of very productive land use at that time, back in 1894. This is actually that same street today, and you can see the market difference. His point is that this development doesn't even generate enough revenue to the municipality to pay for the maintenance of this street. So the street is not a very productive street. We have that same issue in Lancaster. The 1920 street, very productive. By the time we had reached just before we redid our downtown boulevard, the street was such an awful place to be, traffic speed and otherwise, that it actually repelled investment away from it. So one of the things that we want to do is how do we get our streets to once again generate productive, viable growth along them and not repel it away? Our solution, of course, was what we did with our boulevard, and it pulled investment back in, and it pulled business back in, and it did the things that it really should do in this kind of a local setting. Some of what we're going to undertake in this Complete Streets effort is different. It goes against the grain of conventional thinking that has really directed street design for the last 50 to 60 years. But as we always say, the most dangerous phrase in the language is we've always done it this way. Some of what we're doing doesn't work very well, and it's time to really rethink how we approach this for the safety of our community, for its productivity, for its financial resilience, and that's really what our Complete Streets effort is about, and you'll see more about it as we enter it. We want to make sure that we are giving back our citizens proper return on the investments that we make, and that we can maintain for the long term what we invest in. That's my presentation on this.
Thank you very much. That was very informative, and it's a lot to think about. The curbside chat, is that something that's open to the public?
You have a flyer that's in front of you, and I'm inviting you as commissioners and also to reach out to people that you know in the networks that you circulate in throughout the community. The Strong Towns team really is looking at the long-term fiscal resilience of communities and how design affects that. The city is very, very interested in this in terms of its long-term look. And while part of this may be very, very difficult to kind of listen to, I think it's a conversation that we need to open and have, because cities in America in general are having trouble. They are struggling with maintaining just basic maintenance and basic services. When we look at cities like Detroit, like Memphis, you can say that part of that is mismanagement, but in some ways they're just simply further along on the curve than where a lot of other places are headed also. And this requires us to rethink how we look at some of this. This organization and Chuck Marone, their president, will give kind of a rundown of how we got to the point that we're at and some of the things that we really ought to do in terms of changing our thinking about how we look at community design, development pattern, and how that ties in with the whole long-term fiscal strength of communities. We have a short video. 3 minutes is an introductory video, but if you look at where the links are on this, and this is an active page, I believe, Joy, on our website, you'll be able to click to these, look at these. Like I said, I encourage you to come. I encourage you to invite people that you think might have an interest in this. And if things on this seem to be something you might disagree with or not like, that's fine. Because this is really the start of a discussion that we as a community want to have. And, you know, there's no time like the present on this.
Every city thinks it is unique, but they're not. They're all fundamentally the same. We all have the same ordinances, the same building codes, the same road standards, and we all financed our growth in the same way. And so, we're all fragile in the same way too. At the same time, everywhere.
I'm not here saying what everybody else is saying. You know, how big is the tax increase going to be and who's going to pay for it? How deep is the service cut going to be and where is it going to be felt? It's critical that we see the third variable at play, the third variable being the current pattern of development. As long as we continue to build in a way that gives us short-term growth today, but massive obligations in the future, there's no way that our cities are going to avoid bankruptcy. We have had decades of the most robust growth any society has ever experienced, and we're still not wealthy. The problem is that the growth is creating these enormous long-term obligations. The way we're growing, the way we're building our places, long-term does not make any financial sense.
We need to have a conversation, not about growth, but about productive growth. About ways of experiencing growth that actually makes us wealthier over time.
Building productive places is not rocket science. In fact, for generations, regular people without master's degrees or zoning codes built spectacular places. How did they do it? It's simple. They just copied what they knew and understood. They built great cities and towns bit by bit, slow and steady over time. Our question then becomes, what incremental steps and small investments can we make today? What does productive growth look like in a 21st century city? We have toured the continent exploring these questions and the problems that led us to them. We have to change because our cities can no longer maintain themselves. But that change does not have to be scary.
The main determinant of future prosperity for cities will be the ability of local leaders to transform their communities.
So I've given, we ran the same video for the Planning Commission at their meeting last week. And I spoke briefly to the Downtown Boulevard Association yesterday morning at their quarterly meeting on the same subject. So once again, I encourage you to come. We are, I think, fortunate to have Chuck Marone here. He actually, 2 days after he speaks here, is speaking to the League of California Cities Planning Commissioners Institute in Newport Beach. In February, he's actually got 2 presentations in Houston, one in Waco. So we were fortunate to kind of catch him on scheduling. The Strong Towns organization is one that I personally belong to. I find that its message is challenging, but I think very, very relevant for many of the issues that we're facing. And like I said, I encourage you to come. I encourage you to invite others that you think may have an interest in this.
Thank you, and thank you for the opportunity. Okay, so I think we have, we've hit on all of our presentations today. Thank you, everyone who did all the work to put those presentations together and make them all interesting for us and give us all the information to think about. Okay, so we'll move on to public business from the floor then. This portion of the agenda allows an individual the opportunity to address the commission on any subject regarding city business. Under state legislation, no action can be taken on non-agenda items. Members of the public should be aware of this when addressing the commission regarding items not specifically referenced on the agenda. Please complete a speaker card for the recording secretary. Individual speakers are limited to 3 minutes each. So before I adjourn, is there anything that we're going to be doing from this meeting that's going to carry over to the next meeting that we need to do, besides attend the curbside chat?
No, I cannot think of any. I'll have a better idea on the Complete Streets effort. Probably, I may have it at your next meeting. We're supposed to go through the selection process in the next month, and out of that, we should get a schedule on the involvement of the ADC on that. in that effort.
Okay.
So, but, and the reason that we wanted to make sure we involved you is because there is a really close relationship between the Master Plan of Trails and Bikeways, which the city has adopted and is carrying out in various locations, and this particular Complete Streets effort also.
I did have a question I forgot to ask Elma. Did you get letters for the grants that you were working for?
Yes, and
Did-
thank you very much. I appreciate your support with that, so.
Good.
For the one 30th West from L to M, that Complete Street portion, we received 15 letters, and from the 30th Street West from Avenue I to N, we received 13 letters. So, once
Good.
again, thank you for your support
Oh,
with that.
of course. Thank you for your hard work. Okay.
Before you adjourn, I forgot about this. Elma is the Public Works Employee of the Year for 2014 for the American Public Works Association High Desert Chapter for her work on projects such as the Master Plan of Trails and Bikeways and the Safe Routes to School Master Plan. So congratulations, Elma.
Thank you very much for all your hard work. Our city is indebted to you. Okay. All right. So this meeting is adjourned to Thursday, March 5th, 2015 at 5 p.m.